I am so pleased to have with us on the show today my good friend, Brother Malachy, who is with the Franscican Friars of the Renewal. Welcome to the Gist, Brother Malachy.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here, Rachel.
I'm so excited to talk with you today. We're closing out the year of consecrated life, which Pope Francis declared this past year. And I want you to share a little bit with me what it means to be part of a consecrated life. And how is that different from, being a priest who's been ordained?
Yeah, so consecrated life, there's three different ways of sort of following Christ in the church, and one would be as a lay person like yourself. The other, very well known, would be as a priest. And then there's the religious life, which is this way of following Christ that seeks to imitate his life as he lived it while he was on earth. So consecrated, set apart for some purpose which is holy, like you consecrate a chalice for Mass. So in the case of consecrated life, an actual person is consecrated through the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience.
And why, when you were praying about, what it is God wanted you to do, and we'll get to, you have an amazing conversion story that we'll get to, what led you to living this way of life and versus, going to seminary and becoming a priest?
Well, I actually did go to seminary for 1 year, and while I was there for my diocese, something was missing, and I didn't know exactly what it was. At that time, I thought that it meant that I was called to marriage, so I left and was looking at that vocation for a time. But it eventually became clear to me that the thing that my heart was really longing for most deeply was to belong totally to Christ and to serve him. And so the distinction for me was one, the community life. So for us as brothers, as Franciscans, we share a really deep communal life with the brothers. Also the life of prayer. We have a real blessing in our vocation, our community, to be able to spend a significant amount of time each day dedicated to contemplation, to prayer, to silence. And also the ministry. The ministry is distinct. You could kind of think of it like you have as doctors, as a general practitioner, and then you've got specialists. So the priest sits at the parish as a general practitioner. He does a little bit of everything. For a person who's in a consecrated life, they're living a charism, which is a specialty in the church. For our life, it means a specialty in serving the materially poor and also doing missionary work as itinerant preachers. So both of those things I just get super excited about.
Yeah.
So I was like, I've got to have a life that is deeply rooted in this relationship with the poor and also proclaiming the word.
Nice, wonderful. Okay, you were raised in a good Catholic, very religious home.
It's true.
And
Thanks, Mom and Dad.
yes, they did good, but you did not latch on to these things right off the bat, and I want you to share that with me.
Yeah, so, when I reached kind of the middle school confirmation age where a lot of young people kind of hit the tumultuous adolescent years, teen years, I found myself really in a struggle of this search for the answer to the question of who am I? What's my identity? And as I sought to answer that question, I more often than not was not looking to within my own heart nor up to what God had to say, but I was looking around at the people around me. And so I started compromising in a lot of ways and slowly drifted from my faith and slowly began to live a life that was just very worldly. And suddenly my way of thinking, my way of acting was much more in line with the world than it was with my faith. At the end of high school, I found myself looking at college, and I was still going to Mass on the weekends because Mom and Dad said if you're at home, you go to Mass. It's not negotiable. You get free rent, but you go to Mass on Sunday. So I was like, all right. So I was going to the Sinner's Mass, as we like to call it, the Saturday night vigil. So you could go to Mass on Saturday night, you go out and you party, and you don't get up the next morning. But while I was at that Mass, some seminarians were sharing their testimony. And as they were speaking, all of a sudden I'm at the back of the church getting more and more frustrated that things are taking too long. And as I'm sitting there, all of a sudden in my heart this question came that was just so clear and so startling, was just simply, would you be willing to do that for me too? And I'm like, oh my goodness, are you serious? What's going on here? And it totally freaked me out. At first I just tried to ignore it. It wouldn't go away. And so I actually left Mass early. And at that time, I made really kind of like a Jonah decision, which is, I know what I think God's asking of me, and I don't want anything to do with it. So I'm going to run hard and fast in the other direction, which is what I ended up doing. And once I jettisoned God and my faith from my life in a real intentional way, I needed to have something to fill it. And so I looked around, well, what does the world tell you is going to make you happy? And essentially it's pleasure. Find it wherever you can and do whatever you have to do to obtain that, and you'll be happy. And so that led to a life where, just a lot of really, impure relationships, a lot of difficulties with drug addiction, a lot of difficulties with partying and that whole scene, and all of a sudden I find myself in this place where this life that I'm living is nothing like what I was raised with. This life that I'm living is leaving me more and more empty, and I'm just struggling with the fact that still, when it's quiet and silent at night and I'm going to bed, there's that question remaining, like, will you come follow me? Will you be a priest for me? And I couldn't deal with that, and so I realized something had to change, and at that moment I made this decision that I was going to do something drastic. And so I quit my job, and I went and I got a couple of my buddies, and we decided to travel around the country following around some rock bands, which obviously makes perfect sense.
That's
It's sort of
deep inner peace.
It's right. Yeah, you want to resolve your existential crises, go follow rock bands in a van driving around the Southeast, which was absolutely insane, but that's what I chose to do. And I found myself going from show to show, living this life, sort of like this pseudo-hippie lifestyle, and it was the whole scene, all the partying and the kids and the music and
that did not lead to any kind of, over time, it kind of wore off its welcome, I guess, like you realized.
Probably maybe a month into this life even, I found myself just realizing that there's something missing here. Like, these kids are really happy when they're high.
Yeah.
And I was finding myself, in the same boat with them, that, like, all of my happiness was contingent on, like, these things that were changing the way that I felt. And
so God revealed himself to you basically, and you tried to run, and then you realized you couldn't run anymore, and you finally worked up the courage at some point to go to confession, and that's where God really just came to you powerfully. And tell me about that, because it's such a, it shows the gift of confession.
Yeah. So I had that moment, when I was out in this whole rock band world, where I just realized I didn't belong, and I felt God calling me, and I returned to Augusta, where I'm from, and this priest invited me to just come have lunch with him. At the end of it, he just said, is there anything else you want to talk about, and I'm like, no, and that happened a few times, and then eventually I said, well, yeah, if you'd like, Father Ted, maybe we could talk. And I began to just open up to him. The first time, really, that I would have gone to confession, I don't know how many years. And at that point, I realized, that all this stuff that was inside of me, all this ugliness, all this sin, all this shame and guilt, was all that I could see in me. And after I was done confessing all of this, he looks at me and he says something that I just would never forget, was that, what? I've always known you've had such a wonderful heart. And at the moment that he said those words, I knew it was Christ speaking that. I knew that he looked on me with love, even though I hated what I saw when I looked at myself. And it totally transformed my life. Flipped everything upside down. And I found myself within a couple of months, going from this totally hedonistic lifestyle to going to daily mass, which is absolutely crazy. But grace is crazy.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing your story. I think it's just so inspiring, and it speaks to, the hound of heaven to me. God he's going to keep coming after us, and, and I love that you're so willing to share it. So thank you so much for being with us on The Gist today.
You're welcome.